Hi, class. All right, so we're getting into our new unit today. And just before we even start getting into our entire discussion of our book, we're going to do the intro to dystopian novels. So, dystopia has been very popular in YA for the last few years, and we'll get more into that on why. But what we're doing today is starting with what is dystopia, talk about what actually is it, because again, it shows up a lot, but we need a definition. Two, the history. Where did this start? How long has been dystopia been a thing? Longer than you'd realize, actually. Three, contemporary. So books you guys would know, 2010 on, so like Hunger Games, stuff like that. But we'll talk more of that in a little bit. Why fairy tales? So, a lot of dystopia is actually based off of fairy tales. And again, we'll get more into that, but it's interesting why. So, then we're going to talk about what book we're reading. So, as you know, I got you all a copy of Dorothy Must Die. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So, what is this book about? Why are we reading this one? And then lastly, we're going to talk about what we're doing in this class. There we go. So before we begin, remember with our rules on lecture day, I tell you this every time, take some notes, ask questions, and stretch your thinking. I really want you to pay attention to this one because you're going to really enjoy this, especially with this section being which surprising because it's about Oz being political. I really want you guys to pay attention. So this lecture is a bit long, so remember, take some time to focus, drink some water. I will post the Google Classroom later today if you do miss something, so you're going to have this anyways for reference, but please, please, please take some notes, please. I beg you. There we go. So what is dystopia? So dystopia itself is an imagined world or society where people lead wretched, dehumanized, fearful lives. So an apocalyptic society. And there's actually an opposite called a utopia, where it's a place of ideal perfection, especially in law, government, and social conditions. So a really strong community. You see here where the picture is like Meet the Robinsons, where it's the very clean, bright, happy look. That's a utopia. Versus a dystopia, I put WALL-E, where it's the trash everywhere, it's disgusting. That's a happier version of a dystopia. I couldn't find any other pictures, so that's what you get. Okay, the history itself. Where did all this start? So there is a long timeline, but it really starts in 1516 with Thomas More. So before Shakespeare, after Shakespeare, before the United States is even a thing. So 1516. It started with Utopia, actually, that beautiful society thing, where Thomas More was satirizing political society and creating an ideal living environment, which led to dystopia, because the idea of a perfect world also means an idea of an imperfect world where everything just goes crazy. So then 1895 dystopia is born. There really is a big argument of where dystopia was first created, because there's millions of books, but for our class and our time's sake, I'm gonna say 1895, The Time Machine, which also kind of invented science fiction. We'll get into that another day, but The Time Machine is one of the first really designated dystopia books, because it's about the butterfly effect and affecting changing the world and making a horrible place on accident and then trying to fix that. But again, we're not reading that, but that's where it came from. So The Time Machine, which also has a bunch of movies and other adaptations, created dystopia. And then 1920s and on, it's a really long history, so I'm just condensing it for you guys. With George Orwell, Ray Bradbury, William Golding, etc., etc. They created their own societies. This goes all the way to the early 2000s. So 1920 to 2000, really long time period, and a lot of dystopia came from that. Again, a lot of dark societies and talk about political debates, which I believe that's our next slide. Yes. So there was a World War II influence, and that was a huge deal. So, like 1984, Fahrenheit 451, The Giver, tons of dystopia was influenced by the effects of World War II and the idea of a tyrannical reign with, the whole Hitler situation in Germany. Many of these stories involve the idea of a broken utopia. Everyone thinks they're happy, and then they are shown the truth of a political state and realize they're living in a nightmare. Yeah, there's a reason I did this unit at the same time as your history unit with Mr. Feeney. I know he's talking about World War II, so I figured we talk about dystopia because that leads into it. So now you can tell Mr. Feeney, an example. So 1984, that's about like people being watched. Fahrenheit 451 is about living too fast to the point where, like, an example that I love from the book is they're driving so fast that the billboards are like 100 feet long so you can actually read it. No one is slowing down. No one is taking care of themselves. They're so focused on like the everyday life. And then The Giver is about, like, again, this utopia where everyone's the same, no one has a personality, and how actually really lifeless life can be if everyone acted the same. So, big World War II influence with the whole trying to, get rid of certain populations and talk more about that with Mr. Feeney. That's not really my area, so... But I figured, again, mention that influence because it is a big deal. There we go. So contemporary books. This is what you guys know. So 2000s and beyond. During the late 2000s and up till now, dystopia has shown up a million times in young adult literature. And this is all thanks to our girl, Suzanne Collins here. So, Suzanne Collins, she's written a million books. So, like 2003 to 2007, it was Gregor the Overlander series. 2008 to 2025 is The Hunger Games. And then some miscellaneous stuff. She has, like, When Charlie McButton Lost Power and The Year of the Jungle. She wrote some kids' books. She's written mainly teen novels, like young adult literature. And The Hunger Games really took the world by storm and changed dystopia altogether. Everyone was writing about populations and, like, again, the district idea. And this leads to Divergent. This leads to a million different topics. So The Hunger Games, it took the world by storm. And yeah, it took, like, Divergent, The Maze Runner, Dorothy Must Die, a bunch of these books where everyone is, like, split into functions and people are just trying to survive the capitalist society. I could talk about Suzanne Collins and her work, like, for hours on end. However, we don't have time for that, and there's a reason we're not reading The Hunger Games as much as I love it, but The Hunger Games, that involves way more talk about politics than we're doing, and it involves a lot more... I knew you'd like this better. I'm going to be so real. This one takes more of the fantastical idea versus the extremely political side of The Hunger Games. And again, we can talk more about that at another day. I know some of y'all are mad at me for not choosing The Hunger Games, but sorry. Come on. There we go. So again, millions of examples. We've got Divergent, we've got the Hunger Games series, Maze Runner, this series called Matched, which I kind of read. You got Cinder, you've got Once and Future. That one I really like. It's about, like, a King Arthur dystopia, and it's all set, again, in the future, in, like, space. It is so interesting. And then, again, what we're reading, Dorothy Must Die. We're only reading the first book. We're not doing the whole series. We don't have time for that. And we do have other units to teach, so All right, so fairy tales. Why fairy tales? So a lot of fairy tales have been retold with darker versions, and especially like with dystopia. Again, there's always like those what if stories of people didn't get a happily ever after. The most prominent examples are the Lunar Chronicles, Dorothy Must Die, the Red Queen series, and it's because there is already a really dark history with fairy tales. If you think the Grimm brothers, where it's like Cinderella's sisters cutting off their feet, and other like really gruesome details. We've Disneyfied them for a while, and now the Disneyfied versions are becoming darker in dystopian novels because people want to talk about the what if, and people want to discuss the idea of, you know, the hierarchies, and people want to talk, like, it's an easy way to talk about political topics, the ecological issues with magic. It just makes more sense, and it really works, especially in this case, where, again, it's not a big spoiler, but Dorothy is sucking the magic out of Oz, and that just, again, you can easily see some symbolism there. And again, a lot of fairy tale books do this, where, like, the Lunar Chronicles is also about capitalism, and Once a Future about capitalism, etc., etc. We can go on this for hours, but there is a lot of like fairy tale and like fantastical elements, even in like the Hunger Games, when they're like, you know, mixing animal breeds and stuff. But I digress. So our read, again, this is still an English class. It's not a history lesson. But come on, you've been working so well today. There we go. What we're reading, Dorothy Must Die. I know I keep showing this, but there's a reason. Because, you know, we're going to have to dive into this bad boy. So in 2014, Danielle Page, that lady right there, wrote Dorothy Must Die, which is a retelling of Oz with that dystopian twist. Our girl, Amy Gum, is sent to be Dorothy Gale and save Oz. Dorothy becomes this evil princess instead of the cute little girl from Kansas that we know and love. So, about Danielle, she again mainly did the Dorothy Must Die series. She also did these two other books called Stealing Snow and Mira Tidebreaker. Her biggest thing was Dorothy Must Die, and she hasn't written anything since 2019, so she might come back, she might not, who knows. But this series blew up when it first came out. Like, it was everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You couldn't walk into a bookstore and not see Dorothy Must Die. And again, other like twisted tales from like 2015 to 2020. So yes, Dorothy Must Die is what we're reading. Again, it's take the idea of this cute little sweet character we've always loved and make her an evil tyrant, basically. And so for next class, what we're doing tomorrow is we're doing a slideshow about the Wizard of Oz, talking about, you know, the history of it, what this book is diverging from, and then we're going to actually start reading tomorrow. And the first couple chapters are very short, so it's not going to take us that long, but we're reading tomorrow. So, again, this is still an English class. All right. Do we have any questions before going on? No? Okay, amazing. So, that's it for the history of Dystopia.